Hallo iedereen, welkom bij Dutch&Go. Today we're going to talk about 5 things that you should focus on if you're a beginner student of Dutch. These are a list. This is a list that I compiled of 5 things that you should master, 5 grammatical topics basically, and also some spelling that you really should master if you're a beginner. The list I compiled here is basically based on the idea that we are going for efficient communication and grammatical topics that, if you don't master them, might cause confusion in you being understood. Okay, so the focus is on that. It's how can I communicate as effectively as possible, and how can I make sure that other people understand me as well as possible. Let's go. So the first one is probably the most obvious one, but so important. It's the difference between long, short, and vowel combinations, and mastering how the relationship is between spelling and the pronunciation and the differences in pronunciations, etc. Just for for 2 very good reasons actually. First of all, if you master this, you'll gain a great deal of independency when it comes to being able to pronounce new words. You'll be able to pronounce, let's say, 80% of the words in Dutch, because yes, Dutch is that transparent. You write everything that you say, and you say everything that you write. Once you know how the spelling works, you also know how to say a word out loud, so that's kind of cool. And then the second reason is that there are a lot of words that share the same consonantal composition, the same what you call phoneme, but that change vowel radically, and then also the meaning. So meaning, if you do not master the vowels very well, then that could also mean that people might find it very difficult to understand you. They might be able to derive from the context which word you mean, but it's just going to create a lot more difficulty in you being understood as easily as you could be. So think about things like, for example, the difference between vis and vis, or bier, boer, buur, huur, hoer, hoor. Very different words. Extremely different words. Cool, cool. Leuk, luik, etc. And there are many other examples too. This is just, off the top of my head. This is just, some randomly compiled examples, but there are so many. So learn the spelling rules, and you'll also be able to conjugate verbs correctly, make the plural, declense adjectives. So learn these spelling rules, learn how to pronounce long, short, and combine vowels correctly, and it will make the Dutch language so much easier for you. I've also made a video about that, which you can check out here. Number 2, inversion and sentence structure. Sentence structure is quite crucial in Dutch because it is the most important thing that we have to indicate a difference between a question and a statement. So for example, if I say, jij komt uit Nederland versus kom jij uit Nederland, yeah? Already by my intonation, of course, you can hear it, but especially if you're a beginner, intonation will probably not be as good as it could be later on once you get more advanced. So even more important to get the sentence structure right. It's not going to make a huge difference in misunderstandings necessarily, but it will just make it so much easier for you to just make the difference between what is a yes or no question and an open question, which I've also made a video about, and then also inversion and when to use it. Something about the inversion rule. So for example, I'm talking here about the rule, you can say, morgen ga ik naar het park. Ik ga morgen naar het park. No inversion, but in this first sentence we do, because time is in the beginning. It's not that it makes a huge difference in terms of you being understood. Morgen ik ga naar het park. It's not grammatically correct, but people will understand you nevertheless. But it is important if you want to ask questions. So for example, as I said, if you want to ask, kom jij uit Nederland versus jij komt uit Nederland, the second one is a statement and the first one is a yes or no question. And it's really important for you to master the difference, because it will just make it so much easier for other people to understand what it is that you're saying and what kind of information you want from them and what kind of questions you're asking. That's basically it. Tip number 3, pronouns. Master the pronouns. Pronouns in Dutch are not necessarily super difficult, but it will contribute immensely to effective communication and to also avoid confusion. I sometimes have students that have some difficulty in pronouncing the pronouns correctly. I'm thinking here of pronouns such as the difference between jij and hij, yeah, you and he. Those are two different things, but if you don't know how to distinguish them well, it can create some confusion in communication. Who you're asking a question to, who you're talking about, who you're referring to. Also the same for possessive pronouns. Careful with zijn and haar and hun. You do want to make sure that you are using the correct pronouns because it's just that kind of referential thing. If I'm talking about one person and all of a sudden I'm switching pronouns to feminine or masculine or the other way around for no reason, then people might all of a sudden start to think, oh wait, but are we still talking about the same person? So, you know, mastering the pronouns is just another tool, another step that can help you to communicate effectively. Number 4, master the auxiliary verbs. Auxiliary verbs are not necessarily easy depending on the source language that you're learning them from, but they're so crucial and they can create a lot of confusion if you do not use them correctly. So for example, moeten, which means to have to. Then, niet moeten means to not have to not be obligatory, to not be necessary. Same, mogen means to be allowed to. Niet mogen means to not be allowed to. Kunnen means to be able to can, to have the possibility to. Niet kunnen means to not have the possibility to not be able to. Yeah? So, if I say, for example, je moet niet roken, that means you don't have to smoke, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And of course, I mean, I'm not saying that that would be the end of the world kind of mistake to make, but it would just, for the other person who you're talking to, it will just take that extra amount of effort to go, oh wait a moment, moeten, no, you mean mag probably, right? So, it's just you want to diminish as much as possible the work for the person who you're talking to. And mastering auxiliary verbs, they do come in handy when you need them. And when you need them, you want to make sure you get it right just to not create any communication confusion. Tip number 5, master the participiums. Participiums in Dutch are a nightmare. I know. They're not easy. There are a lot of regular participiums following the soft catch-up rules, participiums that end in S, F, T, K, T, C, H, P, and then in T, and start with G. Those that don't end in D, and then we have a whole list of exceptions, vowel switches, etc. There are some systems, there are some little tricks that you can use. I've posted some links down below to lists that I made on Quizlet and Memrise and SoundCloud with audio that you can use to practice participiums that I would absolutely encourage you to use. But I would absolutely master participiums. It's just because, again, they can be such a huge factor in you not being understood. If I say, for example, ik heb gekookt, whereas I mean ik heb gekocht, one means I've cooked, and the other means I've bought. Ik heb mijn televisie gekookt means I've cooked my television. Yeah? Believe me, this is a mistake that I've heard many times from students. Not mastering the participiums can make it a lot more difficult for other people to understand you. Having said that, for example, when we're talking about the perfect tense, knowing when it's hebben or zijn, sure, learn it, make sure that you know it. But on the other hand, it's not as crucial a factor as the participiums are. Yeah? If I say, for example, ik heb naar het park gekomen, instead of ik ben naar het park gekomen, well, okay, of course the first sentence is technically not correct, but people will understand me nevertheless. However, if I start to make mistakes with participiums and I don't get my vowel switches always right, depending on the participium, depending on the verb, it can create some confusion and it can make it more difficult for the other people who you're talking to understand what verb you're actually trying to use, what verb you're actually referring to. So make sure that you master them. So there you go. These were my 5 tips for 5 things that you should master, grammatical things that you should master if you're a beginner student. So things that I did not include, for example, is de and het, because in my opinion, it doesn't matter. Like really, it's so overrated for Dutch students and people get freaked out and nervous about de and het. Do your best. I mean, it's 70% of the times it's de anyway. There are some categories. I've made some videos about that too. But if you make a mistake with that, it's not the end of the world, and it does not contribute to any language confusion or communication confusion at all. Not in the same way that the 5 things that I've listed here before do. So, you know, take it easy on the de and het. Do your best, but also accept that most likely you'll never ever completely master that anyway, because there will always be new words to learn, and depending on the word, it can be quite tricky to understand whether it's de or het. So, you know, let it go. It's fine. It's okay. The second thing that, for example, I also did not include is verb conjugations. I'm not saying that verb conjugations, for example, are not important, but technically I also cannot say that it would be incredibly stupid for you to just say, oh yeah, I'm just going to focus on the structure, and for now I'll just only use the infinitive in all of my conjugations. That would be quite a radical form if you don't want to do the work for verb conjugations, also because verb conjugations in Dutch are so easy. But generally speaking, verb conjugations are relatively minor things that, generally speaking, do not contribute to a lot of like communication confusion. Again, not in the same way that any of the 5 things that I've mentioned before do. I would love to hear from you. Was this video helpful for you? Did I manage to clear your path a little bit through the woods of learning Dutch and what you should be focusing on? Let me know. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching en tot de volgende keer bij Dutch&Go. Dag!